able to access all the services and resources as seamlessly as they can, yet completely under the security and compliance of the organization. When we talk about virtualization or things that we move to cloud these days, there are a lot of factors that we consider, right from security up to my necessity, or we can say that looking up into those resources which we would actually want to offer from a mobile platform. So when we talk about virtualization, initially what matters to us is having a secure platform. And at the same time, when I say I want a secure platform, the security aspect becomes the topmost priority when it comes to organizations that deal with critical information and critical services, like the financial sector or the health sector, government sector, or the banking sector. At the same time, having a versatile workforce wherein I have people who are probably not the only ones who are working for the organization. We might have some external vendors, we might have some third party contractors, we might have auditors, we might have all of those users which probably are not always the permanent ones in the organization. At such a point in time, we will obviously not be investing on granting accessibility over a dedicated laptop or over a dedicated device. That is where we actually encourage things like allowing the users to bring in their own device, putting it into the corporate compliance, and accessing their services and resources over the same. And also, like, the reason for virtualization can be my needs, the business needs, for which I would want specialized workloads, maybe some which are graphically enhanced, some which might allow us to do all different types of software development and testing and stuff, and some which might be able to support applications which have not moved on with the time, or which are the legacy applications. So virtualization today can be done through your Windows Server, or it can be done using your Windows 10 for Enterprise. Now, when we talk about doing it from a Windows Server, uh, I would say that from Windows Server we have that versatility that I can have multiple sessions. I can have different types of applications. I can have Office applications which can be pushed uh, from the server platform, which is called as the perpetual Office. And we can also have some LTSC, like I can have the fundamentals of updating those operating systems at a longer interval as compared to, or we can say at an interval which is going to be much more better than what we might be doing on a Windows 10 platform. So when we talk about doing virtualization over Windows 10 Enterprise, this is going to be probably a single user based desktop. It is going to support applications, universal Windows platform applications, my professional plus operating system, professional plus Office setup to be deployed. And at the same time, the updates over here are going to vary, and they are going to be semi annual channels which are going to be released. While virtualization is done in this way, what we currently have to facilitate this on the server front is my Windows Server Session RDS services, that is remote desktop services. And between the Windows 10 Enterprise, what we now have is a Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. So probably we can say that this is something which is a version between your Windows Server and your Windows client operating system. Meaning, I can now have multiple sessions on a Windows 10 virtualized desktop. I can now allow multiple users to have an accessibility over the applications at the same time from a single Windows 10 enterprise operating system. And all of these can be hosted in the cloud. So Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session is what we can say is the new normal to have a virtualization or a virtual desktop infrastructure in place over the cloud. This Windows 10 multi-session is exactly what virtual desktop is all about. So when we say Windows virtual desktops, what exactly we are talking about over here is enabling multi-sessions over Windows 10, supporting Windows Server 2012 R2 and above to manage and to facilitate or to restrict these kind of Windows 10 operating systems. In today's date, it is considered to be the most flexible service which allows you to not only just virtualize your desktops but also virtualize the applications that are running. WVD does have support for Windows 7 as well, which is going to explicitly keep receiving the security updates. And at the same time, this is a deeply integrated platform with Microsoft's 365 security and compliance or the enterprise mobility security suite, so that any virtual desktop that you're provisioning will be completely secured, will be completely made compliant, will run as per the policies that you might have implemented in your on premise, but they will be running as an extension from the cloud. The operating systems that we have supported over here are your Windows 10 multi session operating system, Windows 10 Enterprise single session. So even when you deploy Microsoft Virtual Desktop, you have an option over there wherein do you wish to deploy your Windows 10 Enterprise operating system as a flexible session, or do you wish to deploy it as a single user session? So when I say a collective session or when I say a multi-session Windows 10 Enterprise, I'm talking about pooled sessions over here wherein I will have one operating system serving all. And when I say Windows 10 Enterprise single session, this is a dedicated or a personal session that we will be deploying for a user. Doing a single session based Windows 10 Enterprise deployment honestly is going to be pretty cost consuming, nearly 2 to 3 times higher than what a multi session would be. Windows 7 single session and servers by default have a multi session support. So here we are talking about the operating systems that are supported as a part of your WVD infrastructure. Windows Virtual Desktop is something which has been, you can say, evolved in 2019 early days, and time since then it has been continuously uh, adopting improvisations and providing the services to the users in the most seamless manner and making it the uh, most integrated platform on the Azure cloud to provide seamless services to the end users. To have a Windows Virtual Desktop in place, there is a list of prerequisites that we need to look into. We need to have an Azure subscription. We need to have Azure Active Directory in order to make sure that on my those virtual desktop sessions, I am only authenticating those users which are part of my organization, which are controlled using the Microsoft 365 security and the compliance center. I will want to synchronize my users from on premise and make them available in Azure so that those identities from the cloud can directly hit the WVD platform. I need an on-premise Active Directory or a domain controller, the way we maintain in today's date, a legacy domain controller, in order to make sure that I can control these WVD instances using group policies. Also, we would need some Azure resources like the virtual network, storage, etc. in a region to store, to build a repository for all the logs, for all the profiles, for all the user components in that particular storage or in that particular Azure location. And lastly, you require certain level of access on your tenant and on your subscription in Azure to make sure you can seamlessly go ahead and configure every single aspect of WVD. You require credentials at two levels. You need to, at initial level, appoint a WVD administrator, and at the same time, you need subscription level access. So practically, you need a user account who is a VM admin, who is an Azure Active Directory global admin, who is a subscription admin, and at the same time you will provision that user to be a WVD admin as well. So not necessary that I need to have all these four roles assigned to a single user. I can have all of this assigned to different users, but I do need the credentials of all of them for my WVD environment to be set up completely. So what basically is a WVD environment? To explain or to summarize, probably before getting into too much of a technical depth, WVD is like, first of all, work from anywhere, anytime, access the most highly available resources on a Windows 10 operating system from your home. So probably if I ask my user to work on a heavily loaded graphic based operating system today in this COVID-19 environment where all of us are working from home, if I ask the user that you are supposed to do this from your laptop, he says, sorry boss, I don't have a laptop or I do not have a device which is probably having a nearly 16 GB RAM or a 32 giga RAM or something of that sort. That is where WVD comes into the picture. I set up WVD. I set up the kind of hardware requirement that I have for that virtual workload to run. I set up what kind of graphic setup is required for that particular Windows 10 operating system. I make it secured with my Active Directory. I get it completely collaborated with my Microsoft 365 platform for security and compliance purpose. And then I grant the access of this particular Windows Virtual Desktop to my user sitting at home, and he can start probably performing every single activity on that virtual desktop. So instead, in spite of sitting at home, he is working on a device as powerful as my organizations need. Yet, whatever he is serving is not anything lying on his own desktop. Instead, it is going to your corporate environment, to your cloud environment, and it will be saved securely over there. So, Windows Virtual Desktop is something which can help you enable all your users to access all your corporate data from wherever they are at any point in time, still being completely compliant to not leak out the information or resources from outside that virtualized Windows 10 session. You will, of course, need a couple of things when it comes to your network as well, because when we set up some kind of a virtual desktop environment like this, we'll often have our customers coming to us and asking us, saying that, okay boss, if I'm doing something like this, how do you assure me that my users will be able to access everything that they have in their on premise? How do you assure me that whatever my user is willing to access from my servers lying in my own data center, they will be able to access it? The answer to this is your Windows Virtual Desktop topology that you will configure will completely be connected to that network, which is going and setting up a site to site VPN with your on premise network topology. So at any point in time from my WVD, if I'm hitting a particular request to go to my on premise, this particular thing is actually going to implement, or this particular thing is actually going to establish a connection using that site to site VPN tunnel with your on premise data center and start serving the resources from there as well. We need a domain controller in an Azure subscription. If I probably don't have a domain controller in an Azure subscription, I can simply start using Azure ADDS, that is my Azure Active Directory Domain Services, or if I want to set up a hybrid environment, then in that case I will be able to do that using a VPN connection or maybe an express route, which will connect to my on-premise domain controllers that can be found in Azure directly. The advantages of spinning up a domain controller in Azure is that you can sync it with your on-premise domain controller, or this particular virtual machine can be used or it can be stopped, and you will only be paying for it as you use it. The negative for this can be that this particular management of virtual machine might get a little difficult if your staff or if your IT environment is a little limited. So doing this kind of a management for an additional server or an additional resource might become probably an add-on administration for you. If you use Azure ADDS, the advantages over here are many. Like everything, majority of it is going to be taken care of by Microsoft itself, by Azure itself. But still, the challenge for this is you will be incurring like quite a big, heavy charge every month for utilizing some services like this. Lastly, for hybrid organizations, we use VPN or Express Route to set it up with the on-premise Active Directory services. And while we do this, here I will not require any specific additional domain controller or any kind of a server in Azure. The challenge if I set it up in this way will be that my on-prem environment might give me a little bit of latency because my request will altogether go from my home to the cloud, from the cloud to the on-prem data center, and then get the accessibility back altogether. The value, I would say, or the time taken for a round trip might be considerably more. And this assumes that you have an on-premise environment not suitable probably to, for the cloud, but you're just testing it, you're just trying to utilize it and things like that. So yes, when it comes to identity, what we ideally suggest is have an on-premise connectivity using a site-to-site VPN, spin up a new domain controller in Azure, and then simply just sync it to Azure Active Directory and start with the process. That's what I was critically mentioning over here, that pick up a domain controller over here it is mentioned that you can use Azure AD domain services, whereas we ideally advise you to take up the IaaS platform, and you can simply spin up a virtual machine, install Active Directory, and sync it with Active Directory in Azure in order to have your environment managed completely. Doing so is going to require you to, as I mentioned again earlier, it's going to require you to have a site-to-site VPN or a express route in place. Creating this particular tenant. Now, while I say that we will be setting up, all of these things in place, I would say that this particular Windows virtual desktop environment might be little lengthy to set up, because you probably just go to your WVD environment, get it the necessary permissions from your Azure Active Directory, and while you set it up with Azure Active Directory, you will actually get the relevant permissions granted and have your environment enabled for WVD to run. May that be for a complete desktop, or may that be only for applications. So it can either be a VDI or it can be a remote app. Both need to be configured in the same way. While deploying Windows virtual desktops, we might come up over here with a question which would say that, what if tomorrow my number of users increase or my number of users are reduced? If at all, there is something like this that happens where the number of users need to scale up and down, we can definitely set up an automation in the environment wherein I can have the existing pool of workloads scaling up or scaling down based on the requirement of my organization. And while we scale up and scale down, we will be only charged based on the consumption of the resources that we are doing. While we often talk about RDS as a component, while we often talk about RDS as a component, we are always concerned about something called as the profiles. Like, what about my user profiles? What about the accessibility? How is my resource going to be allocated to the user? That is where over here we are talking about something called as FS Logics profiles. FS Logics profiles are something which are going to be per user per session, something similar to the user profile disks that we have in our RDS environment. So we will definitely have our FS Logics profiles which are going to be stored in the backend on a centralized storage. That's the reason why earlier I mentioned that you will require a storage to be in place. So we will require a specific storage to be in place, which is going to maintain all the profiles and make sure that each time a user is trying to access something, the profile is loaded accordingly. When we talk about the storage in WVD, the storage in WVD will be classified in multiple different ways. So the very first thing that comes is like while you create a virtual machine, a VDI based VM, the strategy used to be such that everything used to be stored on a temporary disk with regards to the transactions that are happening. You would have an operating system disk which was being stored inside a storage account as a page blob. You had multiple data disks which were stored inside Azure storage, but they used to be normally some kind of a disk or maybe some block based data, the way I place it. Today, while we do it using FS Logics profiles, there is a little change. All your data with regards to your VMs does not go to the data disk. Instead, it goes to the logics profile, which is stored in the backend separately. So over here, the virtual machine will not only have a method to access the operating system, but it will have a method to access this particular data stored on the data disks, and at the same time call for the user's profile from the FS Logics file share that might be created in the backend. This becomes the biggest advantage that even at any point in time, if my data disks are not accessible, user will still be able to access his normal data which is stored as a part of his profile. So the way we do a roaming profile enablement in a particular tenant or inside a particular environment for my users, similarly that roaming profiles configurations are being configured today when we talk over here about FS Logics profile. While we talk about these kind of storage components to be configured when it comes to these FS Logics profiles and things, yes, definitely there are certain dependencies. The on-premise AD integration, which shows over here to be coming soon, is something which has already been into testing currently, and we can expect that integration of this with the on-premise Active Directory will be facilitated soon in order to make sure that then you can also set up access control lists, permissions, and do many more things with regards to the configuration that you might do for the profiles. Here, the Azure Active Directory domain services that we are talking about is something which you might want to set up, but as I said clearly, it is going to be a little bit more expensive as compared to what you might be managing and hosting in your on premise. So Yes, this is probably the third variant of directory services on the Azure platform. We set up a storage account. Post that, we configure the profiles path, and then my Windows virtual desktop is accessed with that particular profile for the user. So administrator assigns the users to those specific hosts that would be configured on the WVD platform. The end user will log in and the profile will directly load the way it loads in case of a roaming profile in an on-premise or in a traditional environment, in a native on-premise environment. Configuration of Outlook will again remain the same way. Configuration of Outlook will also be taken care of in the same manner. Your environment will pick the default settings. It will synchronize all of your inbox and your calendar settings for the initial experience to be seamless. There will be options that you will find to figure out how much of it do you want to sync on this VDI session. And based on that, you will then get a Windows desktop search service to perform search more seamlessly, because now the search service is for desktop and not per host. So yeah, over here when we talk about Outlook and stuff, FS logics is something which will become mandatory. And once we have those things configured in place, user will be able to take an access of the resources equivalent to what he might do while sitting inside the office. Same way it works for OneDrive as well. And over here, we talk about a couple of more in detailed things of how the deployment might work. While you want to spin up some kind of WVD components or some kind of a WVD desktops, you might have a custom image which is lying in the in the backend, which you can just upload it to Azure and spin it up inside your environment, maybe using your Azure update management, using your SCCM, etc. If not, you can have vanilla operating systems also spinning up for sure. Lastly, you will have a list of best practices that you need to look into while setting up a WVD environment. WVD is not as easy as RDS, or not as easy as simply providing an end user an accessibility to Windows 10. WVD has got its own pros and cons, and it has got its own methods of configuring. Hence, it is very much important to focus on the best practices and make those best practices used to the fullest. Application masking technology is something which will be required again. This will be required so that you don't have a user while hitting to the application each time generating a new request altogether. Hence, we might have an image of the application designed and pushed onto WVD. So each time that the user hits that icon, directly the application in the backend will be loaded and the application will start providing whatever resources or services that it used to the end user. When we say patch management and stuff, practically speaking, it is damn easy and simple, because it is something that can be managed from your Microsoft 365 update configurations. But if at all you want to do a manual management of all the updates, then yes, you can use SCCM to manage your these images. Now the question is, SCCM is something which is lying in my on-premise. These WVD sessions are something which are going to run in the cloud. How on earth am I supposed to manage these images using SCCM? The answer to this is very simple. When you set up WVD, when each of the session is generated, you take the access of it and make it a member of the domain. Each of that WVD session is something which is considered as a system in the IT infrastructure. It is considered as an identity in my directory and device management components. So when I am pushing any kind of updates or patches or any resources, I can definitely push them using SCCM on those WVD devices as well. So it's like it is that brilliant that you have all of it running from the cloud, yet being managed from your on premise to not compromise any kind of security or any kind of service that probably might risk your environment from the cloud. Profile management also goes pretty much simple, as I said, because it would be using everything in terms of a VHD in the backend, like the way we do user profile disks, if at all we are aware of the same, like in an RDS clustered or a high availability environment where I have an on premise multiple servers providing the session host or the virtualization host. We have our uh, our user profile disks configured in order to maintain the consistency of every user session. So profile management again becomes that simple on that particular front. Graphics and videos would never be an issue. Reason being, the Azure, I mean, the WVD environment is backed with the best level of graphics that it can provide from the infrastructure perspective or from the server perspective. And for this, the the way it handles the video and graphic acceleration in the backend with the least possible frames per second that are required, it gives immense of immense of ease or immense of I can say the accessibility becoming much more smooth over the WVD environment. So if at all I'm playing a video, it's not going to be a kind of a platform which is going to keep on buffering or utilize a lot of memory or something, because this particular platform is going to do the encoding and utilize those services in such a way from the Azure infrastructure that the playback is as smooth as the video moving right on your local machine. You can ask your VDI infrastructure to actually get it redirected to the devices on your physical machine. Isn't that great? So I can have a virtual Windows 10 session of which we take an access to, and from that virtual desktop session, I can ask it to make use of my hardware based devices like my camera, my video sessions, my USB devices, etc., etc., which practically is going to allow me to exchange data from on-prem to this virtual session. Virtualizing the Windows Server, use this particular VDI infrastructure to virtualize my environment. Then in that case, I can even do it for my servers like my 2012 R2 server, 2016 or 2019, using my Office 365 Professional Plus. But the challenge over here would be that 2012 R2 and 19 will only support the typical server level of operating system, server level of Microsoft Office version, and not anything else like the Office 365 Professional Plus, which is supported in 2016. Virtualizing Windows 7, you can have Windows 7 as well on a WVD environment, because Microsoft has explicitly given a 3 years ESU. When I say ESU over here, it's an extended security update for the same. It requires full Windows 7 desktop, and it uses App Assure or something else at the initial level to at the initial level to then start providing Windows 7 in the backend. This should be the last option that you should look for obvious reasons, because you can actually rely on Windows 10 single user session or a multi-user session in the backend. Then why have Windows 7 as a legacy operating system being deployed? So by any chance you have an application which is not supported on a Windows 10 environment, in that case you might think of spinning up a Windows 7 machine. Full desktop versus a remote application. Having a full desktop, you might have power users, you might have developers that will need their own applications and resources that need to be installed on the devices with admin privileges. And at the same time, the client, the end user's device might not have that level of hardware which is compatible enough to, provide those services. Using remote apps is going to be any day advantageous, any day much better, because the moment you start using remote apps, it is the cloud which is going to back the complete functionality. It is the cloud environment which is going to provide the best possible hardware and resources. And at the same time, the applications that will be provided are going to be pretty much versatile in terms of being accessible across different operating system versions. When we talk about WVD deployment, there will be definitely three aspects. One is going to be the deployment. Another one is going to be the management which can be done definitely way enough from the Azure portal itself. And then lastly, you're going to have a hosting partner environment wherein probably you might become the one who's going to host the entire environment for multiple customers and provide the entire virtualized infrastructure from your uh, responsibility perspective. This would definitely require you to have things like your Azure AD B2C environment, because not all users for all customers are the ones who would be in your environment. So you will require an Azure AD B2C tenant, business to consumer tenant, when you would want to extend your support or services using WVD to multiple customers. When it comes to performance, we will definitely look into a lot of best practices or things that we need to focus on, because they are ultimately going to be cloud based VDIs. The VM or the resource that I might want to deploy should be deployed to Azure regions with WVD clusters. So it should not be a single node environment, it has to be a multi node environment. Active Directory should be located in a data center which is the closest, if it is on premise. If not, then probably it is recommended, highly recommended, for you to spin up an Active Directory in Azure itself. You should use a multi-session one, which is a cost-effective one, rather than dedicating a single session for every user. You should have VM configurations that match the use case or the requirement of the end user, rather than having extremely high performing or extremely low performing in WVD infrastructures. And it is a recommended solution that while you implement this particular aspect, you should have the cluster done in such a way that you have an auto scaling setup for the resources to be accessed during a particular window or during a particular span of time. Once the utilization is completed, probably I can downscale them again and save on the cost front, because ultimately WVD is all a consumption based cost. FS logics we already discussed. Like, now over here, what we are talking about is the benefits that you have for WVD as an infrastructure. So when you deploy WVD, it uses a complete VDI infrastructure based on VHDs rather than having a hypervisor in the backend. It's way too seamless to implement and manage, very easy to integrate, completely seamless end user experience in terms of resources, in terms of videos, in terms of graphics. And it works with other application management platforms. It can be integrated with multiple ITSM solutions. It can directly communicate with your on premise. It can integrate with multiple other SIM solutions. Easy to test, implement, and manage altogether, and reduces network and file system load, of course, for a reason that you will not have a user accessing this particular. User will not be accessing his resources from his physical device all the time. WVD is something that would be always in use. The profiles lie in containers. As we already discussed, they would lie in the backend, which is going to be a shared storage. At the same time, you will have Office 365 also, which is going as a part of the container, which makes sure that all your Office 365 applications are as applications the way you have roaming profiles. Office apps have native performance and behavior, so virtualized, it's going to be as it is, and works alongside other profile management platforms. So you can also have, let's say, for example, JAMF integrated with this particular solution to have all the devices under the compliance of Intune, and you can have other profile management services.
आप कर फिदा करें सिर्फ इस मर्तबा और सबर कर लें अल्लाह की कसम मुझे सही सलामत आप लौटता हुआ दिखेंगे मैं जिंदगी भर फिर कभी अकेले सफर नहीं
Over
करूंगी
here
गुरु ने
is
अपने कहा
without any
मैं
kind of a
जानती हूँ सब
sequencing or
इसलिए नहीं मुस्कुराता
snapshots or
कि अब तो ज़्यादा
deploying
होगा
dedicated packages or
उसके
something
दवा
of
इस
that sort. They
मर्तबा
are just
तू
the
वापस
on
नहीं
the go
आएगा
applications that
जब
you
तक
have
ये
over there.
सोच
So
गंभीर से
all applications that you will
ज़िंदगी
find would
काटने से
be
भी नजर नहीं
deployed
आती
over
वो रोकर
the
समझाया मगर
WVD
उसने अपनी
instance
दिमागी कोई बातों पर
based on the requirements. So basically, all the apps are
सफर पर
as
रवाना
and
हुआ
when
वो
required,
मछलियां
they'll be
ठीक
enabled.
समंदर में पहुंची
For the
बस
user
अचानक
who
तूफान
doesn't
आ गया
require it,
और
they'll not
कश्ती
be
आपस में
accessible.
टकरा गई
Only
तूफान को
apps
बाढ़ हो गई
a
दुनिया
user is
टूट टूट कर
entitled to,
अब तो
basically
आंसू
it
भरने
will be
लगा
your access control list
उसे
or your
शौहर की
licenses
बेटी
that will
बातें
define
लगा
which apps the user is
लेकिन
supposed
अब
to have.
मामला उसके हाथ से निकल चुका था जब तक उसकी बात
App
को
entitlements can be
उसने
changed
उसकी
in
बात
real
नहीं
time. So,
सुनी
for example, you
वो
have a
अपनी
user
बातें
coming up to
कहते
you and
रहा
saying that, okay, I need an
पर
access to this
जब मामला
application, which
उसके हाथ
I
से निकल गया तो वो और उसके तमाम साथी साजो सामान समेत समंदर में गर्क होकर मौत के घाट उतर गए फिर उसका बूढ़ा बाप भी चंद ही दिनों में अपनी बेटी की जुदाई के वक्त
applications
सारे पानी से कूच कर
that you
गया
have newly assigned the permissions to will
उस
be accessed by
बड़े
the
की
user.
सारी दौलत उसकी जोजा बेटी और बेटे में तकसीम हो गई
It is
जोजा
easy to work
उसकी
with
शादी
fonts,
कर दी
plugins, and
लेकिन
much
बेटी
more,
की भी
and it
शादी
has
कर
got
दी
an excellent app
कर्ज के
compatibility with
ईमान में उसकी एक बेटी पैदा हो
applications,
चुकी थी उसका
most of
नया
them being
शौहर
from a third
उसकी
party
बेटी का
platform.
शौहर और उसके बेटे की बीवी भी शरीक हो गई
And
जहाँ जिसे
lastly,
बनकर
you can
ऊपर
also
चले
have
जाते
something called
वो
as
यही अंजाम
Java
लेकर आए
reductions.
कहते हैं
When I say Java
मुझे
reductions over
अपनी
here, I
बेटी
mean,
के बारे में
sorry,
होता है
Java
फिर
redirections.
हम
So when I
कहते
say over
हैं
here
ऐसे ही
Java
क्षमा कर देंगे
redirections,
गुरु पर
it
कभी
means
भी
that
करते हैं इंसान
on the
खुदा
WVD
हाथ जोड़
session,
गुजारा कर ले
we can
जो कुछ अल्लाह ने तेरे से किया है
securely
उस पर गुजारा कर
implement
ले
multiple
ज्यादा से
versions
ज्यादा
of
ज्यादा
Java
करे
on the
वो
same instance.
मगर ज्यादा
And
तकलीफ उठा
I
सकता
can
है
have multiple
उस
applications, I
पर
can have
आंखें
websites
रखे
requiring
थोड़ी सी तकलीफ तो होगी लेकिन फायदा बहुत ज्यादा होगा अगर तू ज्यादा माल के पीछे ना पड़ेगा तो कर्जे तक पहुंच जाएगा और अगर फिर जवानी करना है तो अपनी जान के लिए जखीरा कर
at the same time we can also
अपने
use
अमाल
these
में
kind of
पकड़ ले
Java
खटमल
functionalities
यारों के लिए अपनी
for
जान को
fs
दामन में
logics
ना
app
डाल
masking
वरना तुझे
in order
उन्हीं
to
की
hide
पैगाम होंगे
the unwanted
जो
applications or
ये दुनिया के
unwanted
अंदर
versions
मौजूद
of
नहीं है
Java to
जो
be
घर वालों
accessed
के लिए
by
औलाद के लिए तो
the
करता नहीं
users.
लेकिन खुद उस दौलत को उस मुल्क को
So
बढ़त नहीं पाते हैं इसलिए वो चीज
this
अपनी करें
overall
रात
is
भर
a
भी रहे
summary for
अल्लाह
your
का
Windows
शुक्र अदा
virtual
करते हुए अल्लाह की नेमतों का शुक्र अदा करते हुए आप जो कुछ कमा रहे हैं अपनी जात को भी उसका फायदा पहुंचाइए ये नहीं कि मेरे इस्तेमाल से मेरे बच्चों को फायदा होगा या आने वाली
we
नस्लों
know
को
that we might
ये
have
शुक्र अदा करते हुए
most of our
अपने बाजू
customers,
बढ़ती
most
है
of our
रोजे
users
हज
demanding some kind of
जायदा करने
services,
की
some kind of
इबादत से
uh,
तमाम मालिक
accessibility
अंसारी
like
का
this
नजर आने
when we need to work from
लगा
home.
सोलह सौ
And
इक्यावन
hence,
हमारे
it is
नजर
necessary
शामिल
for us
आया
to know
दोनों
that
के थे
investing
अगर
on a
बंदे को
resource
इज्जत
like
अच्छी होगी
WVD in today's
तो
time
दोनों की
is the
का इतना नुकसान नहीं
fastest and the
करेगी
wisest
जितना
decision
नुकसान
that we can
करेगी
take,
वो चीज
because
खुश करेगी
most of the customers
माल की
in today's
हैसियत की
day,
लालच दूसरा मनसब की चाहत यानी मुझे बड़े से बड़ा ओहदा मिले मुझे ज्यादा से ज्यादा माल मिले इंसान के दीन को तबाह कर देता है
the Windows virtual desktop on the fly. So